My name is William Sisson. I'm Director of Sustainability for a large multinational corporation in the United States. This chapter is going to present the role of public-private partnerships in addressing some of the key challenges we have. I'm going to spend a little bit of time framing this discussion around the building sector. The buildings sector is responsible for roughly a third of all energy use in the world, and 1 out of every 5 CO2 emissions is actually emitted from this sector. So it's an important sector for us to understand. It has tremendous implications. When you look at urbanization and population growth in the world, it's just going to be exacerbated, maybe double or even triple the amount of energy use and emissions associated with the sector. So this again frames a bit of the challenge we have to address. The sector as well is fragmented. There's many decision makers and transactions that occur in the building sector. A well-intended initiative around something like energy efficiency, which is the subject of at hand here, requires many to align and agree in the end result, and sometimes that becomes compromised as transactions work to the finished product, that being the building. So we have a tremendous issue with the contributions that buildings make to climate change and emissions and energy security. We have a tremendous challenge with the nature of the industry and the sector and the fragmentation. But being the voice of business, there's a tremendous business opportunity. And just to put that in perspective, if we can just take a modest 25% of energy use out of all buildings in the world, that's roughly a $2.6 trillion market to business and industry. That's just what's minimally required. If you take the goals of the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, they're projecting energy use and associated emissions in buildings have to be reduced by 80% by 2050. So that $2.6 trillion becomes quite attractive to business as we start to pursue those goals. But again, here's the challenge. The industry has its fragmentation issues. And so how do we use a public-private partnership in a way to really bring the opportunity together with the challenge and address that fragmentation? We've used a public-private model that we've developed with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. The WBCSD gives us the privilege of working with other companies that are interested in addressing these issues in sustainable development. So we naturally can cooperate with other businesses to form a private sector-led initiative to work with the public sector. We've created a model, we call it the EEB Lab and Platform model. That model allows us to take the private sector, mobilize the private sector in cities around the world where we can engage the private sector in those local markets to work to better understand the opportunities and issues in their local market with energy efficiency, and then involve the public sector, the government officials, the city officials in that dialogue. This laboratory, we call it, is really just an immersion workshop, but it works in a way that other workshops that just involve NGOs and maybe city officials don't, because we're involving the private sector in those initiatives. We've demonstrated this in 10 markets around the world. We've gone to both developed economies and the developing economies to experiment with this model. We've piloted it, if you will. We've learned along the way of what works and what doesn't, tried to improve ourselves as we go along. And we think we've got a fairly impactful methodology of framing a effective public-private partnership with energy efficiency as in buildings as the core issue that we're trying to address. So now, to exemplify this, we can take two cases that are from very different parts of the world. We were in Houston, Texas. We worked with the Houston city government. We worked with the Houston private sector stakeholders in that market. We assembled around 100 different people to engage in this lab and platform methodology. Over that period of time, we launched the initiative. It's called the Houston Platform, where a local set of stakeholders, mostly private sector, have worked for the last now 2 years. they've continued the momentum of working together with the city officials to launch new initiatives that enable energy efficiency. The one we're probably most proud of is the private sector leadership of that group assembled an interest for a new financing model in the city of Houston, something called PACE. PACE was available to the state, it was regulated in the state, but it had to be implemented at the city scale. This team of folks that we helped mobilize through this public-private model I've explained went to the city and argued for the city of Houston to have its own PACE financing model. The city agreed. A few months later, the city announced its PACE model, its PACE financing program. And today, there's a $100 million pipeline of energy efficiency projects in Houston that are taking advantage of that PACE financing model. This is just one example of how you can mobilize private and public sector interests to put forward an effective solution in a very challenging area that I explained earlier. Another example is in Jakarta, Indonesia. Very different market than Houston. But there, the challenges were very similar: raising awareness, addressing capacity issues, addressing financing, and addressing effective regulation that would help unlock energy efficiency in the Jakarta marketplace. And there, a tremendous amount of interactivity now has gone on since we've held this lab and platform engagement, where there's a private sector group now working with the city officials to enable a better and more effective energy service financing system for the Jakarta market. Still a little bit further to go with it, not as far as we've been with Houston, but the timing is consistent with, I think, where it needs to be. We have 8 other examples where this has happened, but we don't feel we can stop with 10. 10 pilots exemplify what the methodology can do and what an effective public-private partnership can achieve. But now it's time to scale. EEB Amplify is a private sector-led scale-up initiative built on the foundations of the LCTPI to enable a broader group now of private sector companies to come together under the framework to enable a pilot project to extend the model further. Our goal is to see 50 cities by 2020. Our ambition is that by 2030, we can affect 50% of the energy used in the building sector. And that's a tremendous amount of momentum now we need to build up. And initiated from these 10 pilots, addressing these structural and other issues I framed in the beginning, and starting to see the rollout of new and effective models, business models, transaction models, technology innovation, and policy innovation that will affect change in cities across the world.